This is my 12th year being a minister. Some of you will remember when I became a minister right here. Shelley does. A lot of you, yeah, my 12th year. And so what I have learned over the years for myself in order to stay grounded, in order to stay in the mystery of the questions, in order to keep asking the questions, in order for me to keep learning and growing. For me, in the way that my soul is wired, sacred and spiritual travel do that for me. You know, the ground that New Thought walks on is the ancient wisdom of millennia. And so I plan my year. Shell knows. I budget, I plan, I know when I'm going to get filled up so that I can bring that back to you and I can continue doing this work in the healthiest way possible for me. And so my husband and I just went to Ireland, and it was an absolute delight. I was able to immerse myself in Celtic history and spirituality. I come from an Irish family on both sides. I don't know if that's obvious, but there we are. My dad's side of the family is from County Cork and Galway, in particular, a beautiful small seaside village in County Cork called Kinsale. And my grandfather lived there when he was a young boy for a time. And when I was there, my husband David and I made friends with the locals, and I learned some things about my family that we did not know heretofore. It was fascinating. And while the details aren't important about why they ended up leaving there and going to the States, to San Francisco in particular, my takeaway from that experience was that over time, often the details, the specifics of a story change. Depending, you see where I'm going with this, depending on the audience at the time. The details of the story can change, but it is our responsibility to make certain that the core truth of the thing remains. We're living in a time right now in this country where there are those in certain states who are creating revisionist history, who are trying to gaslight generations of us, saying that slavery wasn't all that bad. It is horrific and wrong and will not happen on our watch. The truth of a story is paramount. We all experienced, those of us who are here today and online, we experienced the pandemic. We experienced that. We know what that was. Can you imagine future generations from now, sort of like I was in Kinsale, generations from now, hearing other people's version of our story? In particular, I think about them, 2, 3, 4, 10 generations from now, watching videos of us trying to figure out how to Zoom. You're muted! It's the red button. I still do it. But you know what I mean? The truth, the important truth of a story is everything. Why? Because we learn as humans from our lived experience. So last week was Palm Sunday, and Shelley spoke about the importance of that event. And she talked about how Jesus of Nazareth went into the holy city where he knew that he was going to be killed. That's very important to me, that he knew that ahead of time. And at that time, as Shelley taught last week, A horse represented strength and power and war, and one would have expected him at that time to enter that holy city on a horse, right? He did not. He entered that holy city, and all that was waiting for him there on a donkey, which at the time represented peace. He humbled himself. He surrendered himself to the divine power within himself. He did not need to show up defended because he lived in alignment with the Spirit of God and the divine. He would never intimidate. You know, many of us face difficulty in our own life. We may be in a holy city, if you will. We may be facing something difficult, a challenge. Maybe it's a health challenge or a financial challenge. Maybe it's a toxic relationship, whatever it may be. And we're always at choice. We can enter that experience on the horse, defended, ready for a fight, or we can take the wisdom from Jesus of Nazareth and enter that experience surrendered, remembering our divinity with the intention of peace and healing. The word Easter comes out of the ancient celebration of fertility and spring. The actual word itself, though, means dawn. Every single day, just as dawn ascends from dark to light, the promise of Easter, the lasting promise of Easter, teaches us that no matter what holy city we may be entering, so to speak, each day we are given an opportunity to transform in the name of peace and love and healing. So what does this Easter story have to teach us 20 centuries after it first happened? 20 centuries. Talk about stories changing. However, the truth remains. And the truth is what I want to talk about today. I think that we start with the concept of resurrection. Deepak Chopra wrote, "The symbolic language of the crucifixion is the death of the old paradigm. Resurrection is a leap into a whole new way of thinking." Resurrection is a leap into a whole new way of thinking. Now, I understand that this whole sort of resurrection idea can be tricky for some. I totally get it. I'm going to talk about that. But really, though, the question is not whether we believe in resurrection, but whether we have known it. And more importantly, whether we are living it. The original meaning of the word resurrection meant to rise above something, to rise up. That's what resurrection means. The East Indian Jesuit Pratap Naik wrote, "Each time we love again after having our love rejected, we share in the power of the resurrection. Each time we hope again after having our hope smashed to pieces, we share in the power of resurrection. Each time," he wrote, "we pick up the pieces, wipe our tears, face the sun, and start again, we share in the power of the resurrection." Every single one of us has at some point in our lifetime risen above something, and dare I say, risen above something really difficult. And if you are in that place right now, I am here to tell you, love, that you are not alone. You are not alone in this. Jesus, just like the Buddha and Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Mary Magdalene, they were all historical figures who walked this earth. And the historical fact is that Jesus was a poor, displaced refugee. He was a Palestinian Jewish carpenter. and his followers called him rabbi. A true social activist and a feminist who cared and surrounded himself with the people who others dismissed. And on his very last day on this earth, he could have done anything. What did he choose? He chose to teach his disciples how to wash the feet of others. He wanted to ensure that his ministry would continue. This was a man of peace. He was falsely accused on made-up charges. He was killed and he was crucified. And as the story goes, unlike his other disciples, Mary Magdalene and the holy women were at the foot of the cross when he died. Mary Magdalene and the other holy women went to the tomb, or more accurately, it was a cave, 3 days later to prepare his body for burial. But here is the thing. Mary Magdalene in particular was absolutely bereft. She goes to the tomb or the cave, and as the story goes, Jesus is not there. There's different accounts of it. She goes into the garden. She is crying. She's alone. She's weeping. And she sees a man who she thinks is the gardener. It's really Jesus. And the man says, "Mary," and she recognizes him. Mary Magdalene was the very first person to recognize the ascended, resurrected Jesus, who was no longer Jesus of Nazareth, but now Jesus the Christ. Now, this is the part of the story where we lose some people. I get it. I totally get it. So I want to normalize this for you. In my work, I have the extraordinary privilege and honor of sitting with people as they are making their transition. I have been with many people who have passed on. And there is something that happens. There's something that happens in the period of time just after someone passes on, where their essence is close. Do you know what I'm talking about? I know you know what I'm talking about because you tell me these stories. You know? Where it's happened to me personally, where a beloved loved one has passed on, and I feel them around me. I hear them, I see them, I feel them, you know? You know how it is when someone passes on and you tell me this, you'll say, well, and then I looked up, I was thinking of them and I saw this bird and I knew that that was a sign from them because it was a certain kind of bird or a certain song or an undeniable sign that you know deep down was just for you. And it was so that our loved one can let us know that they are just on the other side of the veil, and that veil is so thin. Mystics and teachers, saints and sages have talked about how thin the veil is. We talk all the time here about the seen and the unseen sides of life. Some of us can see the unseen sides of life. That's great. It's close. I'm sharing this with you to make this story more relatable. Mary Magdalene loved Jesus so very much. Of course, she felt him in the garden. Of course she did. Just like all of us have the ability to sense and feel our loved ones on the other side of life. Even if it's simply in our faith. If you ordered or brought a lily in remembrance of a loved one today, as I sat here when the choir was singing our beautiful, beautiful beautiful song that you did for us. We can feel the love that's right here. Do you see? This isn't anything woo-woo. It's normal, people. We are energetic beings. Life is eternal, and we continue on. Always, always. It's a normal miracle experienced. You know, in Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke, the word death is not translated in the same way here in the English language. It's more closely related to the idea of simply existing elsewhere. That's all. Existing elsewhere. So when I think of Mary Magdalene in the garden in her grief, experiencing the presence of Jesus from the other side of life, it feels to me like the most normal thing. Duh. Of course, of course, of course, beloved Mary Magdalene, you would feel him. Jesus said, "These things I do, you will do." In New Thought, in our metaphysical New Thought teaching, we understand that Jesus was not the great exception, he was the great example. He was the greatest example. Never once did Jesus say that he was somehow different or better than anyone. Quite the contrary, he taught and he proclaimed, not I, but the Father, or we say here, the Spirit within does the work. And this is true of all of us. He was clear about that. All of us have the same divine spirit within us. No more, no less. Some of us just know it better. Some of us walk with the realization that divinity lives at the center of us and every single being on earth. The beloved mystic and teacher, so dear to us, Ernest Holmes, wrote, "The resurrection is the death of the belief that we are separated from God." The resurrection is the death of the belief that we are separated from God. I think about Mary Magdalene every Easter. She's, I think, probably my favorite character in the Christian Bible. Again, she was there when he died. She was the first to see him ascended. And that woman had some serious moxie. The Eastern Orthodox tradition of Christianity continued her story, and it's one of my favorites. I like to share it every couple of years because we have new people, and I'm all about speaking the truth. So there are many versions, many versions of the details of this story. I'm going to ask you to listen with the ear behind the ear for the truth of it, because I think it's just so cool and so beautiful. So, Mary Magdalene goes to the court of Tiberius Caesar, where they're having a feast, to issue a formal complaint about how Pontius Pilate handled the unfair trial of Jesus. This, by the way, is evidence of her high social standing and her wealth. How else would she be able to have an audience with Caesar? So as the story goes, right there at the feast, she tells them about the horrific death of Jesus, and moreover, about his resurrection, about his ascension. Then one of the men at the feast doubted what she had to say, and he said to her, "Jesus could no more resurrect than the egg on this table could turn red." Mary Magdalene picks up the egg, and it turned red in her hand. We have, throughout history, especially during the Byzantine art period, images of Mary Magdalene holding a red egg. We have some examples of that. That's just some. Long before Christianity In the pagan world, eggs were a symbol of creation and spring and rebirth. But after the resurrection story, they took on an even deeper symbolic meaning. And the tradition of sharing eggs at Easter stems from Mary Magdalene's proclamation of the resurrection of Jesus the Christ to the emperor. So one could say, we have Easter eggs because of Mary Magdalene. Thank you, Mary Magdalene. And so since we're speaking about truth, I just want to set something straight. For millennia, it was said that Mary Magdalene was a sex worker. In 1973, the Broadway musical Jesus Christ Superstar depicted her as such. Also in the 1988 movie, The Last Temptation of Christ, and in the 2004 film, The Passion of Christ, as well as the 2016 movie, Risen. They all depict Mary Magdalene as a sex worker. For those of you who don't know, that is completely 100% false. It's simply not true. Pope Gregory in the 6th century was giving a sermon and just decided that she was. I don't know, maybe people were falling asleep. He needed to spice it up a little bit. He figured the whole 7 demons thing was somehow connected. I don't know. And it just grew from there. Some of the details of stories are very important. Mary Magdalene actually financially contributed to the ministry of Jesus. Most theologians and historians believe that. She also financially supported the disciples. How else would she have an audience with Caesar? It wasn't until 1969, 1,378 years after Pope Gregory's, let's call them alternative facts. It wasn't until 1969 that the church officially corrected its mistake. They said, and I quote, Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. There is zero evidence of that. In 2016, Pope Francis himself said, Saint Mary Magdalene is no longer to be referred to as the penitent prostitute. She is to be referred to as the apostle to the apostles. Truth matters. So whenever I travel, I always will pop into any kind of church or cathedral that I stumble upon. It's like my thing. It's my jam. It didn't used to be my jam. It took me a long time to heal the patriarchy that I would feel when I would walk into a church. I got to heal that in this life, and I'm telling you, being on the other side of it is so glorious. So I go into these churches. It was so funny. David and I were in this tiny little town on the coast of Ireland, and we're walking down the street, and I look up and I see this church, and I go, oh! And I look at him, and he's like, yes. I love you, darling. He knows me so well. I realized something now. Every time I go into one of these ancient churches, and they're ancient, they're thousands of years old, hundreds, nothing. We're babies in the United States. We are babies here in the United States. We have nothing even close. I go in, and I first look up, because, you have to. It's amazing. The stained glass, the whole pomp and circumstance and all the things. And then I find myself wandering inevitably over to the section of the church or the cathedral dedicated to Mother Mary. There were a lot of Marys back then. To Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus. I just happen to gravitate towards that. And that is the place where I light a candle for my beloveds, where I light a candle for this community, where I sit and I pray and I feel so at home. And at one point in our trip, we went to St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. And we had this wonderful tour by this incredible, incredible woman who was telling us all about the Mishigas, about St. Patrick's Cathedral and how it was built and like 800, 900 years ago, and how, I'm always astounded by in these churches and these cathedrals, the men who built them dedicated their lives to something that they would never see be completed. I find that to be extraordinary. And many of these churches, all of them, I would say, were built at a time when women were considered to be property. They were property of their fathers until they were property of their husbands. And yet, in every single one of them, there is a space dedicated to the divine feminine. There is hope living inside that church or that cathedral. And there was one sentence that the tour guide mentioned that I could not shake for the entire trip. She was telling us all the story about all the things. And then she said, it's very interesting that in every single Gothic church during this extremely patriarchal time, they always built an area for Mary. Always. And what that teaches me is that hope is everything. Because those altars, those places, in those sacred places, are dedicated to balance and harmony and the divine feminine. They're dedicated to balance. It spoke so deeply for me that hope is so much more than just Mary. It's for all of us, whatever gender expression you have. That's the power of that lasting hope. This time during Easter, this is a time when hope is rekindled. This is a time where we get to find the area of the cathedral that is dedicated to the divine feminine at a time when all of the politics of the day were squashing it. Spring is a time where the flowers come up and remind us of what is possible. Remind us that we can overcome challenges. And inherent in this concept of hope is power. Hope is a muscle, my friends. Hope is a muscle. When you think about it, hope is the initial first precursor to change. It's the first thing we must have before any lasting change can occur. Hope gives us the spaciousness to roll up our sleeves and to do the work. Hope itself is love in action. And on this Easter Sunday, we get to lean into this in an even greater way because hope leads to transformation. Of Easter, the theologian, Episcopal bishop, and friend to our center, John Shelby Spong, may he rest in peace, wrote, "At its very core, the story of Easter has nothing to do with angelic announcements or empty tombs. It has nothing to do with time periods, whether 3 days, 40 days, or 50 days. It has nothing to do with resuscitated bodies that appear and disappear, or that finally exit this world in a heavenly ascension. Easter is a story about transformation." Easter is a story about transformation. And 20 centuries later, we all understand that truth. We are all here to transform ourselves so that we can transform this world. It is why we incarnated here at this time. Easter reminds us of the miracle of the transformation that is always possible within ourselves and the world. It made me think of, in 2008, I want you to kind of go back, 2008, a young guy by the name of Barack Obama began his presidential campaign, and his campaign slogan was "Change we need and change." That was his slogan. But if you recall, it was the iconic painted image of him that now lives in the Smithsonian Institute. Remember those posters were everywhere of Obama, sort of in that blue and red, iconic painting of him with in all capital letters just below it, HOPE, hope. That's all it said. His picture and hope. Those posters were everywhere. They were everywhere. It went viral. Why? Because it was real and it was true. And it acknowledged that we first needed hope to make that change to elect our first Black president. Hope is a requirement for change. We can't have one without the other. It's one of the best demonstrations I could find. This Easter, I had a new thought. Travel is good for me. I had a new thought about Easter. It came to me that, Easter time, I dress like an Easter egg. We dress up, there's an Easter bunny, there's flowers, the kids are playing, there's an Easter egg hunt, maybe there's brunch later, I don't know. But it's this festive, happy, springy time, right? But the fact of the matter is, especially remembering this in the current time that we are living in right now, the transformation of Jesus of Nazareth, it happened in the tomb. His transformation happened in the cave. When he was in the dark, the transformation happened before the dawn. The transformation happened before the Easter. We celebrate the after, but we don't celebrate the transformation time. Think about the seed in the soil, the caterpillar in the chrysalis, the answer that happens in the depth of the dream, in the middle of the night. Think about the baby in the womb. The activist and author and change agent Valerie Kaur asks us, is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? I believe we are in the darkness of the womb, beloveds. How could we not be? That is the divine promise. Remember, hope is love in action. I want to conclude this morning by bringing into our conversation, marrying this idea of this transformation in the womb with joy, because hope leads to joy. The hope muscle leads to joy. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the spiritual practice of choosing hope. And please hear me when I tell you, I am not talking about the sort of pseudo self-help, Instagrammy, choose you, choose joy trope. That is a bunch of nonsense. I'm talking about the spiritual practice, the courage, the daily courage to recognize, to look at everything that is going on and to also find joy. To choose joy wherever you possibly can, to see the good in the world, to hold that the plant will come out of that seed, that the butterfly will come out of the chrysalis, that the answer will come in your dreams, that the baby will be born. We get to choose joy, and in doing that, we are more effective peace builders. You can simply listen to the birds in the morning. They are there for you. How often do we just kind of ignore them? Or those moments where we feel such incredible joy with a loved one, and we are at choice. We can feel it fully, which takes courage in that moment. Or we can feel the joy and then cover it up and get busy with other things. No, be present to the joy that is all around you, my friends. This is how we truly celebrate Easter. Connecting hope and joy. It's one of the most powerful and gloriously life-changing transformations we can activate within ourselves. To see what is happening, to acknowledge it, to roll up our sleeves, to do the work, and to choose the joy wherever we can find it as we do that. Joy is our birthright. It is that which will sustain us. When I returned from Ireland, my daughter Liza Rose and I went and visited my parents. I was going to tell them the truth about what I discovered. You know. And so we were very excited, and because it's Easter time, I brought a pot of hyacinths for my mom. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. My mom loves hyacinths and lilacs. And I gave them to her, said, Happy Easter. And she said, oh, I have a poem about this. Hold on. She wanted to get it right, so she quietly left, and Liza and I were hugging and chatting with my dad. And my mom came back, and she handed me this little note. I have to have my glasses because her writing is very small. And Mom, there is a recipe on the back. If you need that, you let me know. I'll take a picture. I don't know. What is this? Pork loin? You eat pork? I don't eat pork. Okay. 3 tablespoons of balsamic. Anyway, I have that if you need it. She handed me this poem. It's from Saadi, a Persian Sufi poet from the year 1258. He wrote, If of thy mortal goods thou art bereft, and of the meager store 2 loaves alone are left, sell one, and with the dole buy hyacinths to feed thy soul. I love you, Mom. Buy hyacinths to feed the soul. We have an opportunity to remember the hyacinths in this world. And as we move into this election year, as spiritual people, we have an opportunity to stand for human rights for all people, for dignity for all people. We have an opportunity as people of faith, as spiritual people, to stand for a ceasefire in Palestine. We have an opportunity to stand for the protection of all of our siblings around the world impacted by war. We have an opportunity to stand for safe elections and fair elections in this country and the preservation of our democracy. Oh, my heavens. Hope is love in action. It creates the spaciousness for us to roll up our sleeves. To speak truth to power, let us not forget the power of hope in this election year. Remembering in the same breath to choose joy, to choose each other, to choose the hyacinths. Happy Easter. I love you so much. So much I love you. Thank you.